Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and today is the first of an 8-part series detailing each NFL division heading into 2020. I'll be looking at each team and their off-season moves and what they'll be hoping to do in 2020. I hope you enjoy, like and subscribe for more content.
Is it getting cold in here?
First up, we've got the Baltimore Ravens, who had their best ever season record. They finished 14-2 in 2019, and despite the fact they've won 2 Super Bowls in the past, they finished on 12-4 and 10-6 records, so it was a momentous season for them. They've been on an upward curve for the last 5 years, and they've increased the amount of wins they've had every season. 2019 culminated in the divisional game against the Tennessee Titans, and unfortunately they really couldn't get anything going, and on defense they couldn't stop Derrick Henry, and the Tennessee Titans got the win in the end. Looking forward to their schedule in 2020, they're actually ranked to have the easiest strength of schedule of any NFL team. However, I would say that the other 3 teams in the AFC North have improved since last season, so I don't know how accurate that necessarily is now, but going on win percentages from last season, they're ranked as the easiest, and only 3 of the teams on their schedule had over 10 wins last season. Now, when we talk about the Ravens, we can't not talk about Lamar Jackson. He is the complete package that you'd look for in a quarterback. He rushes, he passes well, and even his weaknesses that's considered to be the deep ball, he's even doing that well now. And he was the NFL MVP in 2019, which really says it all. You can't be any better than that. He had almost 3,500 passing yards and also 1,300 rushing yards with 7 touchdowns. And Mark Ingram was also a force on the ground for the Ravens, contributing 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. The wide receivers for the Ravens are also very good. They've got a lot of pace in that wide receiver core. You've got Boykin, Snead and James Prosh from the draft, whilst also being an amazing tight end factory. You've got Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle being quality pass catchers. They also had Hayden Hurst, who they traded to the Falcons, but it is a really good tight end production line. And on the defensive side of the ball, the Ravens secondary is amazing. There's no two ways about that. You've got Earl Thomas and Marlon Humphreys, who started the season well, but after the addition of Marcus Peters from the Rams, it took the defense to completely another level, and they finished the 9th best secondary overall according to PFF. It was a massive decision whether to let CJ Mosley, the inside linebacker, hit free agency or not, because he was such a key player for them. In the end, they decided to do so, and it was one that paid off for them, because this season with the Jets, he got a groin injury really early on and didn't see the field much. And their outside linebackers were good, but the replacement for CJ Mosley, Bynes and Onwuasor, didn't really do much. On the coaching side of things, Harbaugh's been in charge of the Ravens for 12 years, and he has seen great success winning Super Bowls and making divisional conference games consistently. And the defensive coordinator, Don Martindale, he achieved the 1st and the 4th ranked defense in his first 2 years with the Ravens, which says it all really. And the offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, led the Ravens to #1 overall offense in 2019. And this was his first year with them. So, to have that ability to come in and transform an offense straight away is really quite remarkable. And for this reason, he won Assistant Coach of the Year awards. They've also, this is one of the only times I'm really going to touch on general managers and off-field situations really, but the general manager, Eric DeCosta, is a very, very astute, solid businessman, and he's definitely one of the best general managers in the league with managing deals and the cap, and with his decisions, like I said, about CJ Mosley, and his collaboration with Ozzie Newsome before he left as the general manager of the Ravens, and their plan to take Lamar as late as they could in the draft, while taking Hayden Hurst before him in 2018 was a stroke of genius, to be quite frank. And I'd say the coaching setup seems very stable in Baltimore, and with the level head of DeCosta, who learned from Ozzie Newsome for all this time that he was his assistant, I'd say they're in really good hands moving forward with off-field matters. Looking towards the off-season moves this season for the Baltimore Ravens, they traded their 5th round pick for Calais Campbell from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's a defensive end, and he's a real quality veteran who's going to add some quality and size to the Baltimore pass rush this year. and he's a great addition to a slightly weak defensive line, and that was what let them down in the end against Derrick Henry and other teams. They couldn't really stop the run at all times. The front seven was ranked 13th best overall in 2019, which isn't bad, but if it was as good as the secondary, they'd have had a lot more success and might have even made a Super Bowl run. And then their other trade, which I've already touched on, was the Hayden Hurst trade to the Falcons. They gave away Hayden Hurst and a 4th round to the Falcons for the Falcons' 2nd round and 5th round pick in 2020. And it looks to be a good piece of business, to be honest, because they've already got, as I mentioned, Andrews and Boyle, and it allowed them to go and take J.K. Dobbins in the draft and add to an already loaded running back core. The Ravens had one of the best draft classes again this year, and it seems to be a common thread every single year. We talk about the Ravens just being out and out great performers at the draft every year, and this year was no different. They took 2 inside linebackers, Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison, from LSU and Ohio State respectively, and this should sort out the issue that they had last season of a bit of a hole there, and Justin Madubuike in the D-line to shore that up a little bit. J.K. Dobbins also gives the Ravens 4 true running back threats, and combine these with Lamar, and they look set to really run sides into the ground this year, which could be an interesting prospect. They also added Devin Duvernay and James Prosh just to bolster that wide receiver class and make it even better for Lamar to throw to. And another good piece of business for the Baltimore Ravens, Matt Judon signed his franchise tag for 2020, and Marlon Humphrey had his 5th-year option picked up, which look really good deals moving forward because they're good young players. Retirees, Marshall Yonder, who was a Pro Bowl for many years, retired this year, leaving them with a real gap at guard. But DJ Fluker signed in free agency to hopefully bolster this position. But there is still a gap on the other side, so we'll have to see how that one plays out. Overall, though, I would say analysing all of this and last season and just taking everything into account, I would really say that the Ravens are 100% set for this season, and I could definitely see them going on a Super Bowl run. I'd say their floor for results this season would probably be 12-4, and the ceiling is the Super Bowl, as I mentioned, because they really can achieve anything with this roster that they've got. And even if they don't win anything this year, I would expect big things for years to come. So I'm really backing the Ravens this year to go out and do big things. So next up, we're looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, and to be frank, 2019 was certainly a year to forget for them. They finished 2-14, which was their worst record since 2002. But it was Zach Taylor, the head coach's first year in charge of them, and he inherited a team that, quite frankly, needs a massive shake-up from the top down. And in fairness to them as well, they were quite unlucky with injuries. Their star receiver, AJ Green, missed the whole season due to an ankle injury that he picked up in the preseason practice. And also their 2019 first-round pick, offensive tackle Jonah Williams, missed the whole season due to a shoulder injury that he picked up in OTAs, which was obviously really unfortunate for them. On paper this year, the Bengals have got the 6th easiest strength of schedule. They obviously play the Ravens home and away due to being in the same division, but then they also travel to the Texans and they play the Titans at home, and these are the only sides on their schedule that made it past the wild card round. So looking at this, they should be a bit better off this year compared to last year. So looking towards the roster, the Bengals finally parted way with Andy Dalton, their quarterback, who's been with them for 9 years in the off-season. And looking towards the future, the Bengals got their man in Joe Burrow from LSU in the draft, and he seems to be one of the most complete quarterbacks coming out of college football in recent memory, to be honest. And he, time will tell, but he does very much seem to be a plug-and-play player that can step up and play straight away in the NFL, and hopefully turn this franchise around, of course, because it's obviously on its knees at the moment. The questions over Joe Burrow will be over his quickness, and that's in terms of decision making and also his scrambling, because the Bengals O-line was the third worst O-line in 2019, and he's going to have to be prepared for this because the LSU offensive line that he had was very, very solid and protected him a lot of the time, which was better than most other O-lines in college football. The other skill positions on offense were a big talking point for the Bengals in 2019, with AJ Green missing the whole season. Other players had to step up in terms of his production that he normally gives to the team. And Tyler Boyd did really well. He had 90 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. But John Ross only played 8 games due to injury. which was unfortunate for them. But Auden Tate stepped up with 40 receptions for over 500 yards as well. Looking towards the tight ends, Tyler Eifert was injured for almost all of the season again, yet another injury, leaving Curtis Azuma as tight end one, who didn't actually play too badly, but it was a very bit part offense, as you can probably tell by now with me telling you about all these different injuries. And Joe Mixon, the running back, was outstanding again in 2019, racking up 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. And I would expect him to be as dominant again, in 2020. He did that with a rubbish offensive line, so hopefully he can step up and really do that again this season for them. So the starting front four of the Bengals defense, the 4-3 defense, consisted of Sam Hubbard, Geno Atkins, Sam Billings and Carlos Dunlap, and it was actually extremely effective considering the Bengals defense was ranked 8th worst overall in 2019. They racked up 23 sacks between them, and Carl Lawson also claimed 5 as well. The secondary was largely inconsistent, and they claimed 10 interceptions between the DBs, but they did give up the most yards per reception of any team in the NFL, so this is a real spot to look towards to improve in 2020. Now, on the coaching side of things, you can't be too harsh on them, because the head coach, offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator were all completely new to the Bengals in 2019. It's not very often that happens, so fair play to them. Such a change in personnel never brings immediate success, so we'll see this season towards how well Zach Taylor does, who's unproven in a head coaching role, and also Lou Anarumu, the defensive coordinator who specialises in defensive backs, and Brian Callahan, who's done a lot of quarterback work in the past. We'll see how they get on this season. So the focus of the Bengals draft, obviously in 2020, was on Joe Burrow the whole time. I think they had their sights set on him. The whole lead up to the draft and the draft period. I don't think they really had their eyes on anyone else, to be honest, with that number 1 spot. He is a great prospect from LSU, as I've already touched on. He has all the tools necessary to succeed in the league. Looking towards their other draft players, they took T. Higgins, a wide receiver from Clemson, which will look to provide Joe Burrow with a quality, healthy target at wide receiver, and he'll hopefully stay healthier than AJ Green has. Then next up, they drafted the linebacker Logan Wilson out of Wyoming, who I'd say he's definitely one of the most underrated players out of this draft class. He bolsters an otherwise very weak linebacker core, and he provides a solid link between the front four and the secondary. And then they doubled down in the 4th round when they got Davis Gather from Appalachian State at linebacker as well. But these moves didn't stop at the draft, with the franchise tag being placed on AJ Green, and they signed free agent Trey Waynes to fix the secondary. He had 7 interceptions in his last 4 seasons with the Vikings, which is pretty impressive. And they had some other moves, including signing the defensive end DJ Reader from the Texans. They signed Josh Bynes, the inside linebacker from the Ravens, and also they signed Suafilo, the guard from the Cowboys, and Von Bell, strong safety from New Orleans. So, they did have a real clear out and picking up of new players. They have plenty of cap room, and they've used it to fill these weak spots on the roster, as I mentioned. However, it was interesting to see they didn't pick up John Ross's 5th-year option, so it'll be a contract year for him. If he can get himself healthy and play a full 16 games, then he can really prove himself to try and earn a new contract elsewhere for next year. But overall, I think the Bengals will be better than last year. I don't think there's any denying that. They have made good moves in the offseason. They've used that cap well, I think, on the whole. But there's no doubt in that. The coaches are into the 2nd year, and a better QB, a better overall roster. I would expect a half-decent year, but I would still say, looking at the team and taking everything into account, it's still going to be. I'm still going to say it's a losing record this year. I would say 4-12 is their floor this season, so better than they achieved last year. And I'd probably set 7-9 as their ceiling. I can't see them going 8-8. I just don't think they have enough quality on the roster yet. But hey, I could be proved wrong. But those are my predictions for the Bengals for this season. Next up in the AFC North, we've got the Cleveland Browns. And in 2019, they were the most hyped team by far coming into the year. All the fans, the journalists, everyone was, really hyping the Browns up for a massive year to finally turn their franchise around. And it failed miserably. They finished on 6-10. And quite frankly, with all that firepower that they had on the roster, it really did fail to deliver. And I think almost everyone involved in the NFL was pretty surprised at what happened. Looking towards the strength of schedules, the Browns have got the fourth easiest schedule in 2020, with the home and away games against the Ravens obviously being in the same division, and then they play at home to the Texans and the Eagles and away to the Titans. Those are the only games against teams who made the playoffs last year, so this shouldn't be too much of a problem for the Browns to overcome. Now looking towards the roster, Baker Mayfield was certainly not his usual confident self in 2019, and it really wasn't hard to see why when you look back at the performances. He had the second worst completion rate of quarterbacks in 2019, and he threw a miserly 22 touchdowns but a massive 21 interceptions at the same time. There were multiple reasons for this. The Browns' O-line was awful again this year. PFF graded them the third worst in the NFL, and the wide receiver core that was hailed as one of the best in the NFL failed miserably, and 7 of the interceptions that Baker Mayfield threw were graded as due to receiver fault, and this was because they were tipping balls left, right and centre into the defensive backs' hands, and it was really easy for them. But however, Baker Mayfield does need to take more responsibility himself, as his performances weren't good enough, and if the Browns are going to succeed in 2020, he needs to succeed. He needs to be better, quite frankly. It may be slightly harsh on him, but for such a hyped player who backs his ability, I would expect a lot more production. And I'd say 2020 is really going to be the year to make or break Baker Mayfield's NFL career, at least with the Cleveland Browns. Nick Chubb was a great asset last year at running back again. He had 1,700 all-purpose yards with 8 touchdowns. And I would look towards Kareem Hunt to really form a 1-2 punch this season, and provide an extra asset to the running back core. He missed the first 8 games of last season due to the disciplinary issue he had with the NFL after the kicking the woman issue on video. But once he did come back, he played okay in the second half of the season, but I'd look for a real bounce back for him in 2020 to help Nick Chubb on the ground game. On the wide receiver spots, Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. really do need to step up in 2020 and create a lot more separation on the routes that they run. Maybe with the addition of Austin Hooper, the tight end that they picked up in free agency, and Donovan Peoples-Jones from the draft. It could mean less double coverages for the two of them and better production, but we'll see. The routes that they're running, they didn't have much separation all year, and this was one of the contributing factors to the little production on offense. On the defensive side of the ball, the front 4 starters and backup Chad Thomas weren't actually too bad. Similarly to the Bengals, for not a great defence, the front 4 actually did perform fairly well, and they contributed 26 sacks between them. And Myles Garrett was an absolute beast again in 2019. He had 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles in only 10 games that he played before the helmet smashing incident with Mason Rudolph in the Steelers game. If he was eligible for the season, he would have racked up, amazing numbers, properly Pro Bowl numbers. I would say their front 4 was one of the stronger points of the defense in 2019, and they're hoping that Sheldon Richardson can really step up in 2020 and contribute more to take less double teams and less pressure off Myles Garrett when they're rushing the passer. The secondary does look good coming into 2020. You've got the speedy cornerback pairing of Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward, and the safeties you've got Carl Joseph and the impressive Grant Delpit that they picked up from LSU. Demarius Randall and Ward were the standouts in 2019 on an otherwise poor safety, so Randall's going to be a big loss when he hit free agency for 2020. But I think the Browns will hope that Delpit can comfortably fill this position without any worries. And again, another team that has a linebacker real weak spot. They didn't really have much production there. Joe Schobert was a real stud there. He contributed 4 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles. I think they're going to miss him a lot this year. And Mack Wilson was also quite good. And I think they'll need his production again this year if they're going to do anything successfully. And I think this weakness at linebacker could be exploited this year, as they have a real hole for an out-and-out inside linebacker. They haven't done anything to fill this gap. Coaching-wise, it's Kevin Stefanski's first year in Cleveland after taking over from Freddie Kitchen, so you can't expect immediate success from a coach, as we saw with plenty of teams last year that had first-year head coaches. It doesn't normally happen. I would expect Stefanski to come in and implement a zone blocking scheme similar to what he ran with the Minnesota Vikings, and this will be made more effective with the 1-2 punch of Chubb and Kareem Hunt this season, and use them interchangeably. 2020 also sees the introduction of new offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, who's been the quarterback coach at the Bengals and the Packers, and also a new defensive coordinator in Joe Woods, who's been the defensive backs coach and the passing game coach with the 49ers and the Broncos in recent times. In terms of transactions for 2020, they picked up offensive tackle Jedrick Wills with the number 10 pick of the draft, and it was a real weakness after cutting their tack on the eve of last season in 2019. But Jedrick Wills does really have the potential to have a long career in the NFL. You know, he's got really good attributes. His athleticism was almost unmatched by any other tackle in the 2020 draft. And he really showed up at the combine, which boosted his draft stock massively. And I think he can be the Browns' blindside protector for years and years to come. And then next at 44, they took Grant Delpit, which I've already touched on in the safety from LSU, to replace Demarius Randall. And it was surprising to see Delpit drop this far in the draft. Most people had him on their boards going in the first round or in the first couple of picks of the second round, but he did drop to 44, luckily for the Cleveland Browns. And I think this could be a big pickup for them. He had 8 interceptions, 24 passes defended in his 3 years with LSU. Their last notable pick was in round 3, where they took the defensive line, Jordan Elliott from Missouri, and this just provides more strength and depth on a D-line that could improve even more for 2020 and ensure that there's competition for places. Looking towards the free agency for the Browns in 2020, Jack Conklin looks to be an outstanding sign. I think he could be one of the better free agency signings in 2020. Picking him up from the Titans really gives Baker that more protection for 2020. And with him and Jedrick Wills, the exterior of the O-line seems really set for 2020. Austin Hooper from the Falcons, he was a quality player in 2019, and he was one of the best tight ends, and there's no debate in that. He was quite expensive, $44 million for 4 years of his contract. And this is one of the reasons the Falcons let him go, but he was extremely productive. 75 receptions for over 780 yards and 6 touchdowns is very good for a tight end. And they also picked up Adrian Claiborne, some extra strength in depth at defensive end. And the team exercised the 5th-year options on David Njoku and Myles Garrett. So, these are good young prospects that they're trying to keep with the team. And I would say overall for the Browns 2020, I'd say their floor is 4-12. They could worsen this year. I don't really know. I'd say their ceiling would be 10-6. I can't see enough firepower on this roster to take them all the way. And so that's why I think 10-6 is probably reasonable. They're a very mixed side, very unpredictable for 2020. They could go either way. They could be really bad, or they could be a half decent side. But it's one to watch closely, I'd say. I think if this year is solid and close to winning, or it is a winning season, I think 2021 will be very good heading into Stefanski's second year. And finally, onto the Pittsburgh Steelers. And 2019 was disappointing for a franchise of their size. They finished 8-8, and they have regressed the last couple of years under Mike Tomlin. The quality of players that they have on this roster really doesn't warrant an 8-8 season, and so I would expect a bit of a spotlight on Mike Tomlin for 2020. However, they were better off for the Antonio Brown move. It saved a load of money against the cap, and he's barely played in 2019 because he was such a prima donna and he had so many off-field issues. Looking towards the schedule for Pittsburgh in 2020, and they have the second easiest strength of schedule of the NFL teams. They only travel to the Bills, Ravens and Titans, who made the playoffs, and they host the Eagles and the Ravens. And apart from that, there shouldn't be any hurdles for them that they can't overcome. On the roster side of things, Ben Roethlisberger only played 2 games in 2019. He had an elbow injury in week 2 that caused him to leave the field against the Seahawks, and we didn't see him for the rest of the season. He had surgery, and he sat out the rest of the season, and hopefully we'll see him back and healthy for 2020. But he has been the mainstay of the Steelers' offense since he was drafted in 2004. And if the Steelers are going to have any success in 2020, it rides on him, because Mason Rudolph is not a franchise quarterback. Big Ben needs to take them to success this year. But the questions are going to be whether he can last another whole NFL season of taking shots on his bad elbow and obviously the rest of his body. The rest of the Steelers' skill positions on offense are stacked. You've got Juju Smith-Schuster leading a wide receiver core that is extremely talented, one of the better ones in the NFL. When Juju played a whole season in 2018 without injury, he amassed 111 receptions for 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. But his knee injury gave him a few problems last year, and he ruled him out of several games. Adding into this talent of Juju, you've got James Washington and Deontay Jackson, who have great route running ability, and they create separation really easily. And then add in Chase Claypool, addition from Notre Dame in the draft this year, who has just out and out speed, running quicker than any of the other wide receivers, and it looks to be a real good wide receiver core that's nice and deep. So looking towards the other skill positions on offense, at tight end they added Eric Ebron to try and help Vance McDonald out at tight end, and this tandem could cause real havoc this year. And at running back they had James Conner, who's been a real stud for them since they picked him up a couple of years ago. And they also drafted Anthony McFarland out of Maryland to form another partnership with him at running back. Their O-line also looks to be in good shape coming into 2020. You've got Villanueva, DeCastro and Pouncey all there again. They have a really good partnership, and they formed one of the most solid O-lines in the NFL, and it was top 10 last year. Their O-line was top 10 last year, graded by PFF, so this partnership will look to continue into 2020 and keep protecting Big Ben as best as possible. However, it was the defensive side of the ball last year that won the Steelers the majority of their games, as their defense was simply outstanding. Every facet of their defense worked well. On the D-line, they've got a 3-4 setup. Cam Hayward, JJ Watt and Bud Dupree went crazy in the quarterback's face on most of the plays, constantly living in the backfield. And they racked up 35 sacks between the three of them, and that's insane numbers. If they continue this production into 2020, opposition quarterbacks simply won't be able to live with them. They forced the opposition quarterbacks into so many rash decisions this year, and throwing balls away that they probably shouldn't, and leading to a lot of interceptions, which is what I'll touch on in a minute. Stephen Tuitt only played 6 games in 2019 due to injury, but he still had 3.5 sacks, and if he's fit this year, he'll partner Hayward on the other side of the 3-4 defence to wreak even more havoc for them in 2020. The linebacker core and the defensive backs profited massively from the pressure of the three guys that I've just mentioned. They had 20 interceptions overall between them in 2019. Devin Bush was extremely impressive in his first NFL season. He had 2 interceptions, had a forced fumble and over 100 tackles, and combine him with Dupree and Watt on the outside, and that linebacker core is absolutely set for years to come and looks to be one of the best in the NFL. And then you take this linebacker core and combine it with the quality defensive backs that the Steelers have got on their roster. You've got Minkah Fitzpatrick that they had in the trade from the Miami Dolphins, sending the first rounder there and getting safety Minkah Fitzpatrick, who had 5 interceptions in 2019 and also a forced fumble. That's a great return. And also Joe Hayden, their other cornerback, had 5 interceptions. He also forced a fumble. So when you put all of these units together, you can really see why the Steelers have one of the best defenses in the league, and I'm sure they will again in 2020. So looking coach-wise, Mike Tomlin is definitely one to keep an eye on. As I mentioned, the quality of the squad does not match a 9-6-1 record in 2018 and an 8-8 record last year. He is very experienced. He's been in charge of the Steelers since 2007, so if anyone is going to turn them around, I think it'll be him. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Offensive coordinator Randy Fichtner is his third season in the role after being promoted from wide receiver then quarterback coach from 2007 to 2017 with the Steelers. Defensive coordinator Keith Butler is entering his 5th season with the Steelers, and he's only just kept improving them year on year, and I'm sure he'll carry on doing the same thing. And before that, he was linebackers coach with the Steelers since 2003, so both promotions from within, which is what the Steelers really like to do. So looking towards their off-season moves, I've already mentioned in the draft, they traded away their first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick, which has seemed to play out really well for them. So then their next pick in the draft was pick 49, where they took Claypool from Notre Dame, who becomes the quickest wide receiver on their roster automatically, because he just has out-and-out speed. And he has another dimension to this offense, which means defensive backs can't cheat on the routes, because he has the burners to beat them deep quite easily. The next player they took was outside linebacker Alex Highsmith from Charlotte, who amassed an amazing 15 sacks and 21 tackles for loss in 2019, which is, really, really amazing stats. Anthony McFarland, the running back from Maryland, was next up, and he adds out-and-out downhill speed to the roster. James Conner's a slightly different type of running back, but again, similarly to other sides in the league, they'll be trying to form a 1-2 punch, I imagine, with them, and giving McFarland more reps to give Conner more rest so that he's more effective when he gets on the pitch. Other moves in the off-season, you've got players like Ryan Shazier. He retired, unfortunately due to his back injury, and you've got Javon Hargrave hitting free agency with Nick Vannett and others, but they have made good moves. They've exercised a 5th-year option on TJ Watt, which was obviously going to happen. He's such a good player. Bud Dupree signed a 1-year tender with the Steelers, and they also brought in Eric Ebron, which I've mentioned at tight end, who has the potential to be amazing if he can stay healthy and away from injury for a season, as injuries have just plagued him during his NFL career. Also picked up nose tackle Chris Wormley and a 7th round pick from the Ravens for their 5th rounder, which is quite unusual to see a trade like this into divisionally, but I think this could be a good trade to try and replace Javon Hargrave from the Steelers. Overall, I think the Steelers are going to be a real dark horse this year. I'd say 7-9 is their floor, slightly worse than last season potentially as their floor, and I'd say their ceiling would be 14-2. They haven't got the roster, they haven't quite got the power on offense, I'd say, at receiver to go for an unbeaten season and make a Super Bowl run potentially, but I think they could go 14-2 and have a really good season, at least make the divisional or maybe the conference championship. I do think this will be a team that will do quietly well. They won't tear up the headlines every week, but they'll just fly under the radar and do well this season, and they're definitely a team to be keeping an eye on. So I'd just like to say to anyone who's made it to this point of the video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this content, like and subscribe for more. I'm going to have the 7 other parts of this coming out soon over the next few weeks. So stay tuned for more. Turn on the notifications bell, and I'll see you in the next one.